how do you gain confidence in yourself?
You got to hold your head up high. Everybody's got their thing, and there's going to be something that's going to throw you off. But you got to get up again.
This is Daniel Kodsi.
Over the past 30 years, Daniel Kodsi has been at the forefront of South Florida's real estate expansion. As CEO of Royal Palm Companies, he's developed a diverse portfolio of over 50 projects, including more than 6,000 residences in the region with a collective value exceeding $5 billion.
Expectations lead to disappointment. And so you have to be very careful about what your expectations are. Today,
how do you deal with rough challenge in their life right now?
Got to get up, don't sit on your ass. Back up, wipe it off, and go again. Go again and go again. No one's got it easy.
Wow.
It's all, everyone's in that same boat. It's called life.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another great episode of Tom Talk Success. Today I had a true pleasure to introduce Daniel Kodsi. Daniel is the CEO of Royal Palm Companies, one of the top developers in the state of Florida, based in Miami. Daniel, what a pleasure of having you today. I know we've been talking for a couple of months to try to get you on the pod.
Thank you for
Thanks so
having
much
me.
for coming. I know you have done a lot, so I'm trying to figure out like what is the best way. Yeah, exactly. So maybe you can give us kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I was born just like everyone else, right?
The start of the story.
You know, it's hard to tell where the story starts. Royal Palm Company started after I graduated college. I had dual majors, urban planning architecture, and a real estate finance degree. And that's really when, you know, the Royal Palm Companies, I set them up in 1992. And Royal Palm Companies was meant to set up other verticals, you know, within the real estate business. But you know, my story probably starts even younger than that. When I was young, I was an ambitious kid. I wanted to have my own money, I guess, like any other kid. And by the age of 10, I was working on construction sites.
Wow.
Yeah, I was
10.
10 years old. I remember all the other construction people looking around like, this child labor, what's this kid doing here? And
what is going on?
Sure enough, it was my family's project. So, you know, my father and my two uncles moved to Florida. This was in the late 70s, a long time ago. And they worked on these small, 2-3 story buildings. And I wanted to make a couple extra dollars. I got paid $2 an hour. I was 10 years old, but I'll tell you what, I saved about $120. And
back then, it's about what, 1,000?
You know what? Buying candy and gum pretty much was, pretty much what a 10-year-old needs. Maybe some little toys or whatever. It was a lot of money, but of course, I was too cheap. I ended up saving the money and not using my own money. But I did it every summer, and by the time I was 16, I actually was supervising a job in construction. So even though my story starts after college, I can't tell you I got a lot of great experiences, but one thing I did learn is that I don't want to be a construction worker, that's for sure. That's not an easy job.
There is a difference, right? Right then, it's crazy, because I know people that are in construction, but there is a difference being a construction worker to a business owner in construction.
Well, it's like in any business, right? You can be in any business. Being a business owner versus someone working within the business is always going to be different. So it's someone who's entrepreneurial versus somebody working within a business or within an industry. So yeah, you definitely learn a lot. But I was always. When I was in college, I went to University of Miami, so it was a great place to be at the University of Miami because I remember driving past downtown Miami, and you're thinking now late 80s. If you could believe it, in the late 1980s, and everyone knows what Miami is today, if you could think about it, there was not one restaurant to go eat dinner. I'm just a restaurant, just to eat dinner. There wasn't one restaurant in all of Brickell, all of downtown, and all of South Beach. Not one restaurant. I think like in 89, I think they opened the first restaurant in South Beach next to the Clevelander, which was like a party bar for college students.
So was that because Miami at that time didn't have like people, I guess, with money here, or what was the kind of situation?
It wasn't that. Miami grew, and again, I'm not going to bore your audience with the history of sprawl, but what happened was every city in the U.S., which was post 20th century, right, was designed around cars. They would build central business districts, And then they figured they would build homes around it. People live in the homes, the American dream, live in a house, drive to downtown. What they didn't consider is the fact that more people would move and more people would move. And what happened, it created what's called urban sprawl. And so if you went to any major city in the US, other than cities that were built before the 20th century, i.e. Boston, New York, Chicago, they had the public transportation, they had certain components. If you go to Paris, London, right, they all had public transportation. So these new cities were designed around the car. People would have a car, they would live somewhere, they drive to work and everything else. So the downtown areas of the cities were meant to just be the central business district. You go in, you do business, you leave. And so, in the 90s, literally in the 90s, and I lived through this, it went through, development in itself went through what's called new urbanism. And so new urbanism was going back into the cities and rebuilding them. Miami, happens to be a city that was very successful at that, in that, we've built over 100,000 units,
wow.
right? I think since 2000.
Wow.
Probably more than that. Went from a population of maybe 20, 30,000 people to a couple 100,000 people. I'm talking living in the urban areas of downtown. Adding all the new urban areas, Wynwood was not. I was there when Tony Goldman, who started Wynwood, he's passed since then. I'm still friends with his children, but I remember telling him, "What are you buying all these warehouses for? Are you crazy?" I was buying in downtown Miami at the time, and I probably should have listened to him, right? He had a vision. And so imagine none of these neighborhoods were in existence. Design District, Midtown, South Beach, Mid Beach, south of 5th. None of these neighborhoods were here. So, being at the University of Miami, being down here in Miami, and being part of this growth and what happened down here was really, really, really exciting. When I graduated college, there was no urban development still. We were still building out our suburban neighborhoods, meaning whether you're in Dade County, Broward County.
Yeah.
So these counties are basically, you have the Atlantic Ocean, the Everglades. They're really two bodies of water. And so what happens is we built all the way out to the Everglades and realized there's no more land. I mean, you don't see any new single family.
It's crazy. You look at Florida on the map, it's like a small piece of Florida is actually where people live. Like there's...
Because it's all Everglades, it's all water. It's literally two bodies of water. And so we only had one choice, and that's to go vertical. And it's the best thing that happened to Miami, is that we went vertical. Look at this incredible metropolis that we've built in a very short period of time. And there's no city in America that grew like Miami.
So why does there is the whole situation right now is like Los Angeles, and like there are houses there that I think like didn't got approved to go like vertical as well. Was that like a thing? What's going on there?
I mean, Los Angeles is a perfect example of sprawl going wrong. One of the advantages we had here in Miami is that we did build the urban centers right on the bay, right on the water, next to the ocean, next to the airport. I don't want to get into LA. We're going to digress here, but LA just has their downtown in the wrong place. They can't build from it. It's far away from the other.
So like nothing kind of
exclusive. So there's really there's no connection there, and so you're just forced to have to drive around in traffic. And not to say Miami doesn't have its fair share of traffic, but if you could live today in downtown or in the urban center of Miami, and you can get pretty much anywhere without having to leave. You could use Uber, or there is some public transportation. Again, not great, but it does exist.
So what is it about you, Daniel? So obviously, Miami everything is great, but I want to talk today, really show the audience about because you're a super successful guy, and I think, a lot of people can learn more about, digest kind of like the stuff that you did in your life. But I want to start with, what is like your biggest challenge that you had in your life? If you're looking back. And I know you had a lot of it.
I was going to say, it's a long list, hard to pick one. Whether you're talking in business, personal, you're
whatever you feel like you want to share, something that the audience can learn about.
In business, there's been a lot of challenges in business. It's a very cyclical. Real estate's a very cyclical business, and at the beginning, in my 20s and 30s, and I started young, and I was a very ambitious young man, and I went and raised capital, put together a company when I was in my 20s. And
so how like a guy in his 20s, like let's say there's somebody who watching us is also 20, want to start raising capital and stuff like that. Like, what do you do? Like is it something you just going and meeting people? Like.
So one advantage that I did have was that I did work with some family members after college for a few years, and I developed a bit of a track record. So that was very helpful. So I had some experience under my belt for just a few years, but by the time I was 25 is when I did actually start raising capital. It's not easy. It was not easy. I mean, you're in your 20s, and everyone anyone who has capital, like, why would I give my money to a 20-something-year-old to go build projects? And I remember we put a small fund together back then, and we have other funds we raise capital in, but that small fund, we could barely raise maybe 20% of the fund. In my new fund, I raise that like every week. So
wow.
We'd raise in a whole fund, and really because you'd have to list your age in there, and you see a 26 or 27-year-old CEO, and it's like, why the hell would I give them money? And so it's a lot of meeting people, relationships, and so so when you're talking to people that age. I can't tell you how much advice I have to give to people that are young, and I've done a lot of shows, because that is the first question. How do I become Dan Kodsi, or how do I get into a business?
Or at least, how do you gain confidence that Dan has today when you're 20? I think that would be a good question.
You're not going to have.
There's no way you're saying.
It's impossible, because I can list major mistakes that I made in my 20s that today, I look back and would scoff at, because, this is typical ABCs, but I didn't know that then. And so it's just, it's the ignorance of youth.
That's interesting.
So you're not gonna be.
There's no way.
Listen, there's no way. I mean, listen, there's certain things, there's people that are very capable and they can understand certain concepts, but not having experience or not going through certain challenges that I've been through, that have taught me a lot. Like today, I know what type of, project, where real estate is heading. I mean, I could give pretty decent predictions on what I think would happen in the real estate market, right? And that's just based on experience. In 2021, everyone's like, wow, why aren't you launching a condo project? The market's so hot. And I looked at them and I said, well, first of all, it's a stimulated market. Interest rates are 0, again, just to stimulate the market. We were going through a hyperinflation suddenly, and what I did is I said, I'm going to shift to what I believe is the most, let's say, the easiest type projects to fund. And I started going to Orlando looking at garden apartment projects.
Wow.
And I've closed on a couple $100 million in garden apartments. I have 730 units under construction. And those were the type projects I knew in bad times, or let's say in tight capital markets, you'll be able to fund. So I'm already shifting away while everyone else is, still drinking the Kool-Aid of 2021 low interest rates, and sure enough, 2022 interest rates go up, and then everything turns the other way.
That's crazy. So,
but I wouldn't have known that in my 20s. Right?
Yeah, I agree. And I want to ask you, so being that, right? So let's go back when you were 20, you're starting your career. How do you deal with people not taking you seriously? I feel like there's a lot of people, especially, and whether they're young or even 30s, that are starting their career maybe as a realtor, developer, agent, whatever it is, right? Like, how do you build confidence when really, like, your family not really believing in you? Like, I found it so interesting that I want to know your perspective on nothing is working for you. How do you gain confidence in yourself?
Look, it's going to be hard as a younger person, and older people will know. The people who have the money are traditionally older. I mean, someone could inherit money, but I'm saying traditionally, right? And so they're not going to want to bet on a 20-something-year-old. And the truth is, looking back, I wouldn't have wanted to bet on my 20-something-year-old self versus betting on myself today, right? So it is very hard. Now, what I usually tell young people there's a couple of ways. How do you break into real estate? Now, one of the things is timing. Now, and most young people aren't going to understand timing. But timing is probably more important than anything. I've seen the best projects, best design projects, amenities, you name it, right branding, you name it. In a bad market, can't do anything. And I've seen horrible, terrible design projects in a good market fly off the shelf, right?
Wow.
And so timing is so crucial. And so you have to be able to look at timing and where markets are, because there's certain points in time where markets are going to see a rise, right? And that's really where somebody that's young, if they can catch that wave, and those waves don't come very often. It's like you're a surfer. I don't know if you've ever surfed before, but when you're a surfer, you get those little waves, and
yeah.
I'm going to wait for the next one, or I'll try to ride this one, and then there's this really big wave. You're like, oh my God,
like,
that's the big one. That's the one you're gonna. That's the
yeah.
one. You know, you wish someone caught on camera because you were killing it on that wave. I grew up in Cocoa Beach, Florida, for a point of my life, so I've surfed.
Part of it.
I've surfed with the greatest, actually.
Wow.
Kelly Slater was one of the world's most famous surfers. Was in my high school. But again, not to digress, you got to look at when you think markets are going to move. Now, if you look at markets today, for instance, right, we have high interest rates, which has really kept values either stable, in some cases have lowered. And so now there's people, for instance, sitting on deals that they can't move. They're sitting on sites maybe that they can't move. And so I always recommend young people one of two things. I always tell them, these are your two options. This is the best way for you to get into this business. One option is, if you want to be very ambitious and aggressive, is to find a site, right? Let's say a development site. We're talking strictly development.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about development. There's also, you could buy real estate and so forth, renovation and so forth. But I'm just talking strictly development as a developer. You go in and you find a really, really good site. And I've seen a lot of people do this, right? I remember in 2000, right after September 11, 2001, 2002, there were some great Miami sites. Actually, I built Paramount Bay. You could actually see it if you walk out of here. Paramount Bay, it's a 55-story building.
This is like, by the way, one of the most famous building in Miami, right?
Paramount Bay or Paramount Miami Worldcenter?
Oh, so yeah, I guess.
Yeah, Paramount Miami Worldcenter, I think, is probably the most famous. Yeah, but Paramount Bay still, and it had its day. It's still a beautiful building. But in 2003, there was a young man who he negotiated. So he went to landowners that weren't being talked to yet, right? And he went and negotiated contracts to buy their land. Now, he's got to convince them to tie up their land. He's got to have a little bit of money to put some down, some deposits, be able to do certain reports and everything else. And what happened was, as the market started getting better around 2003, there was developers like me coming down looking for deals. And guess what? These younger guys had these deals tied up and under contract. And they would bring it to me and say, hey, you want to develop it? I got this great site. And either they would leave, let's say, whatever they would get for it. Either they would just get paid for the contract and walk away, or they would say, no, I'll keep my whatever percentage in the deal. And in some cases, people say, well, actually, not only I want to do that, I want to learn, right? I want to get into this business. And now what they do is they go and they hook up with a larger developer because they've got a good deal. They have a good site. And the developer is going to want that site because it's like, well, that's a good site. I can develop on
it. I just want to kind of emphasize that a deal, it doesn't matter what is it that you do, but the deal is the most important part, right?
For someone that's young, yes. If you could find a really good deal
in a good location, probably
in a good location, a good site that you believe that's an area that's going to grow or there's going to be demand for that area. Edgewater, which is right here, the place was disgusting back then. I mean, it was known for, prostitution and drugs, and I'm not talking about
like even where even where this building is.
Where this building was just old broken warehouses. There was nothing here. This was a junkyard. When people heard, if you go look at Paramount Bay, it was the first luxury building built in Edgewater ever. That was the first. It set the tone for Edgewater, that Edgewater is a luxury high-rise location. Everything prior to that was cheap apartment product being built. Very small, cheap product. It was the first 50-story glass building, 10-foot ceilings and
it's still on today, right?
Well, it's still there, and it's still recognized as one of the most luxurious buildings in Edgewater. And then every other developer copied that exact model. But the point was that someone said, well, there's no waterfront left in Miami Beach. This is the next frontier, right? This will be the next area where there's waterfront. And sure enough, that person was right. They locked up the site. The market started getting better. Developers started coming in. And this happened to me twice. There was 2 young guys that had sites that were locked up, and I bought both of them. In one case, he just flipped it for a fee. And in the other case, the person says, no, I want to stay in, and I want to learn development. And that person ended up eventually, getting into a real estate career. And I don't think he was a major developer, but he was able to get into real estate, learn real estate, and, be involved in, major projects.
So then essentially development is, and I had Carlos Rosso previously on the pod, and I asked him the same thing. He's saying that developers is pretty much the innovators of real estate. Like, they come up with basically an idea, they have the site just like you mentioned, and like, okay, I want this place and this site to really look like this eventually. Like, yes, how would you describe developers? You're right. The developer when they go and they have a site, they have to have an initial vision, right? They have to have a vision of what they want this site to be. I'd have to say I was probably more like that, my 30s, 40s maybe, but once I started getting older, I was more concerned about the profitability, I think, than the vision. You start, because the better the vision, the more luxurious it.
Well, you can get tied up. You don't want to get tied up into your vision and not really start to think of practically what really needs to go here. What's the highest and best use from a profitability standpoint. I have architects and urban planners on staff because what we like to do is we like to design the box. Today, when I look at a project, I'm like, what's the box I'm going to sell? And then I can do everything around it and build beautiful designs and make the building beautiful or make the project beautiful. I'll do all that, but what is the box? What's the size of the box, right? In other words, when I say what's the size of the box, what size apartments, for instance, would sell better in this location or would rent better in this location?
Like really like from the big picture to the tiny picture, or like, hey?
It's finding out what is the business that you're doing. In other words, if I'm going to build an apartment complex, if I'm in an area where there's more young people, I'm going to do smaller units, right? And maybe a little bit smaller square feet, but still give the same amount of bedrooms or whatever else. And maybe my rent will be a little less because of the size of my unit, yet I can rent faster because I'm still giving you a 1-bedroom, but maybe for 5% less and so forth. Or if you're in an area, it might be bigger units. Or if you're selling residential, you see there's a demand there's not a lot of large units in the market right now, or there's not a lot of small. So it's all of that. Yeah. It's really analyzing the market and understanding.
That's interesting. Then how do you have in your years dealt with a lot of transactions, millions of dollars in transaction, billions in transactions. You guys hear it right? Billions of transactions is sitting in the room. Then talk to us about like, where does the situation where like probably in the first transaction, the first big transaction you make, like how do you deal with, am I doing the right thing? Am I going to make money? Am I going to lose money? Like, talk to the audience and explain to us, even me, like how to the not being afraid doing big deals. How did you kind of went through those transactions, especially in the beginning,
Look, when you're looking at real estate, it has to be a calculated risk. There's always inherent risk in real estate, in development. There's going to be risk. And so it's a calculated risk, right? It's like, what's my land basis? What's my cost? I always tell people, focus on the capitalization of the project, right? What am I buying my land for? What does construction costs go for? Really just digging into the pro forma of the project. Start there. I always tell people, they're always I buy the land, they worry about the zoning or how many units, right? They start going into, what am I going to design here? And they go through all these things. All that doesn't matter. No.
Wow.
Drill down. That's why I say drill down into the box. Very simple. I don't know. A lot of developers don't say this because they talk about visions and everything else.
It's
The
not.
business of development is very simple. It's building and selling square feet of concrete. That's what your business does, period. That's what you got.
Wow.
People have to realize. It's building and selling square feet of concrete. It's not any different, and it is different, but if I want to relay to someone in a very simple term and say, okay, you're going to be in the t-shirt business. Okay, interesting. I'm going to get a blank t-shirt. I'm going to stick something on it and make it cool because, I want to put either a brand or something on it, right? So I'm going to stick something on the t-shirt and then I'm going to sell it.
Correct.
And so development is I'm going to get a piece of land. I'm going to put some product on that piece of land and then I got to be able to sell it. Now, again, there's branding and design, and you can go on and on and on. Engineers, and I can go.
But the bottom line, that's what it is. I can bore the hell out of your audience with all the mechanics of actually building that project. But at the end of the day, you got to build something that you can sell for more than what it cost you to build it, period. Interesting.
Right? It's 3 lines. I always tell people 3 lines. It's the top line, which is the revenue. It's the middle line, which is the cost. And it's the bottom line, which is the profit. And the color of that bottom line better be black and not red. Right? And that's really it in simple form.
That's interesting. So you're essentially saying like, hey, if I can make a profit at it, that's how you look. But, I'm sure when you first big transaction, like, how do you deal with, I guess, stress, within this business? I'm sure, because I feel like this could be a very interesting question also to me and also to the audience. Like seeing people just like yourself that like, just like you mentioned, doing over billions of dollars in transactions. Like, how do you guys deal with stress,
Look, different people can handle stress differently, right? But it's not any different than anyone else's stress. We're just built to deal with that type of stress, but I've seen people with the smallest problem in the world that you would say, from someone my standpoint, be like, I wish I had those problems. But to that person, that's a very stressful problem. And they may be more stressed about that than what I'm dealing with in a multi-billion dollar, so you should never underestimate anybody's stress. Everybody has their challenges in life. Everyone has to go through their life with their issues and everything else. And so just because our stress has larger numbers, I always say there's a guy who needs $300 because he needs to eat. There's a guy who needs $3,000 because maybe he needs it for, I don't know, his business. The guy needs $30,000. And then there's a guy who needs $30 million to plug a hole or to do something, right? Yeah. But we're all equally as stressed, right? We're all equally stressed. The $3,000 guy, I could fix his problem relatively easy, right?
I see what you're saying.
But he can't fix his problem. He's having a problem trying to get that $3,000 that he needs to whatever it's for to fill a gap or to fill a hole. He needs that $3,000 or $300,000 or $30,000 or whatever that number is.
So you're saying
just add zeros. That's it. Just add zeros. The stress is the same.
So your stress might be the same stress as, for example, Elon Musk or people that are like whatever.
Everybody is stressed about something. There's not anyone that you're going to meet that's not going to be like, that stressed me out. Even if you think it's easy, but why would you undermine their stress? Oh, well, your stress because it has less zeros is not equal to my stress. Stress is equal. It's their stress. It's their challenges. It's what they're going through. And so just because we deal with larger numbers doesn't mean our stress, again, it's development. Yes, it's a very stressful business because there's so many moving parts. You're trying to deal with cities and permits and contractors and designers and markets and interest rates. And so everything affects you. Labor markets affect you. Immigration affects you. Tariffs affect you. So imagine all these different variables that can continuously affect you.
So how do you balance work, life, family, kid? Like, how do you do it? It's just interesting because when you're getting to the higher level, and you mentioned now that it's all relatively the same stress, but like it's interesting, in your perspective,
look,
how to deal with those.
Like I said, you can have an attorney that has to work 20, or people could be in the finance industry. They make them work till 10 o'clock at night. How do they balance their personal family life? Those people have to figure it out on their own. It's not, again,
there's no formula.
It's not unique. Listen, it's not unique to if you're a developer and you're dealing with all these. There's a lot of business. Imagine if you're a football coach, right? And the ball fumbles.
Yeah.
Just think of the stress of that. Yeah. And that fumble was the difference between winning and losing that game. And that game was the difference between keeping your job and not keeping your job, right? Imagine one fumble, coming down to that one fumble. You don't think that's stressful? I'm stressed watching it, and I'm just a fan, right? Imagine if you're the head coach. True. And so, look, it's stress is equal. I mean, it's equal to the person. Look, my theory is God gives you your challenges, and everybody has their set of challenges, and you have to be able to overcome them. And it's not. I think everyone has the same. It has the same level of how it affects them. It's not any different if you're, like I said, if you're Elon Musk or if you're, like I said, the guy down the street that needs $300 to eat. I mean, that's pretty stressful. Yeah. I think it's more stressful than being Elon Musk and $300 for food, right?
That's very interesting. So what would you say to the audience in terms of, we spoke about stress, but I wanted to go back to being confident. You mentioned that you started young, that a lot of people didn't took you serious in the beginning.
No, they did. And because I was like one of those older, younger guys, It's funny, when you're young, I always felt like I wanted to lie that I was a little bit older. And now at my age, I'm still trying to go the other way. But like, I was a serious guy, and I did end up raising a lot of capital. And unfortunately, there was a deal where I lost people money. And I'll tell you what, it feels really bad. There was an institutional group, and I said all the right things, and they believed in me, and there was something in an agreement that it was something that someone did actually screw me over on it, but if I was more experienced, I probably would have protected myself better from that. So it wasn't my fault because I got screwed over on a deal, but it was my fault because if I had a better agreement, I might have not been screwed over. And so,
how did you deal with that? Like, how did you deal in your life with situations that go not really the way that you expected it to go?
I don't want to be a negative guy, but there's a term I've heard a long time ago, and it's called expectations lead to disappointment. And so you have to be very careful about what your expectations are. Today, I'm expecting that, as long as I live another day, my children are healthy, my wife is healthy, my family's okay. As long as that's the case, then it's a good day. Anything else that happens, you're going to have to deal with it. And you should not have unrealistic expectations or any expectations. I can't tell you how many people, they get mad about something because, for instance, they set up a timeline that wasn't realistic. Like, we're so late, we're so delayed. Well, what did you... When I gave myself 6 months, I said, but this would have taken at least a year if you really knew what you were doing. So you're only stressed because you put together a timeline that's not realistic, and you created a false expectation. You had an expectation it was going to be done in 6 months. You represented it to everyone that it was going to be done in 6 months, but the truth was it was never possible to be done in 6 months.
Wow.
And so it's a lot of times people create false expectations, and that's why I say expectations lead to disappointment.
So you never, like, even when you started your way into development, you never had like big expectations, like, I'm gonna have this deal right now, I'm gonna make this and that.
At the beginning, yes, of course, you had all these crazy expectations, right? But then you learn, not to have. Now again, you have to have certain expectations. You can't be, I have no expectation. You can't be, what do you think of this project you're going to do? I have no expectation. You got to have a calculated plan, right? You have to have a calculated plan. I'm just saying not to have too many false expectations. Creating, in essence, creating your own false expectations, not meeting those expectations that might have not even been realistic, and then being disappointed about it.
What is the one? So I know in the beginning of the podcast we spoke about challenges and things not going, your way, or other entrepreneurs out there. How do you personally deal with that? What would you tell to the audience? Like, let's say if they go through a rough challenge in their life right now.
How do you deal with rough challenges? You got to hold your head up high. Donald Trump's probably one of the best people.
I love this guy.
You could see. Listen, I don't have an opinion. I'm not going to say opinion. I don't want to get political. There's some things I like or dislike about him.
Yeah, I mean, on every person, I feel like.
Yeah, I just don't. I don't like to give my own feelings about that publicly. But, he he'll be going through a bankruptcy in Atlantic City and then promoting something great and awesome, and it's going to be wonderful. And what it does is it distracts everyone from the fact that he has a failure. And so you got to keep going. You got to keep moving. You got to don't just sit there and sulk and like, oh no, on this project and that. You got to go.
Wow.
You got to keep going. You got to show everyone out there, no, it doesn't matter. I know I had this thing, but this next one's going to be better. This is going to be great. And you know what? He did this in his career, and he had a lot of failures. And he's a 2-time president right now. Whether you like him or you don't like him, he's a 2-time president. And so it's because of how he handled things. He didn't care. His lawsuit, oh, you're being sued. You're going to look so bad. It's going to be bad in the paper. He didn't care.
He don't.
He what?
I'm saying you're right. Like
He
he
doesn't
don't
care.
But how
He
do you
doesn't care.
get to the point where like things are not affecting you? Do you have to be that big?
I'm not telling you that I'm Donald Trump and it's not affecting me.
But I'm
Things
saying
do
like as a
affect me.
yeah. But I'm saying like as a
No, listen, nobody gets to that point. You're not. You can't expect to ever get to that point where things are not going to affect you. There's always something in the world. Some certain things that you would think would affect you. Like, oh my God, you must be so stressed about that. Like, no, actually, I'm not stressed about that. I'm stressed about this. Everybody's got their thing. And there's going to be something that's going to throw you off. But you got to get up again. You got to get up. Don't sit on your ass. Get back up, wipe it off, and go again, and go again, and go again. There's been so many books on, failing forward, or, there's been a million books like that. I mean, if you look at every story of every entrepreneur or anyone that did great things, Abraham Lincoln, you could read. There's like a long list of all the failures, how many times he's failed as whatever he did. If you ever, I'm using Abraham Lincoln as one person, but you could go through a lot of very successful people, and you can go through their life story. And man, did they have a lot of failures in it.
everybody.
Everyone. All
There's
of
no.
them.
I don't
All
think
of them
there's
had
one
failures.
person that really have massive success without. And that's what at least I'm taking from that is like, hey, this is part of it.
The reason they're successful is because they did what I said. Get back up and do it again.
Wow.
Get back up. Get back up. You get knocked down, you get back up. That's it. You just keep getting back up and you keep fighting. You keep fighting and you keep fighting. That's it.
Until
you don't
bound.
stop. Huh?
Until you have that day that
You'll have that day, but I'll tell you
Something
what.
has changed.
The day you have that day, you got 2 more mountains in front of you that you haven't climbed yet that you're looking to climb. Trust me. It
Wow.
doesn't end. Entrepreneurs and people who have big visions, till they die, there's always a big mountain in front of them. It's
Wow.
just what it is. It's the nature of that entrepreneur. And they just finished climbing this incredible mountain. Everyone's like, wow, you just finished climbing. They already started climbing 2 more mountains by the time you realize they finished this mountain.
Wow.
And they're in a bad spot because they're having a hard time getting up the next mountain.
Wow. Wow.
So I'm telling you, no one's
This is
got it
wisdom
easy.
from
No one's got it easy.
Wow.
It's all, everyone's in that same boat. It's called life.
then what is the last thing you'll leave the audience with? If you were to pick one thing that changed your life or a big lesson you learned in your life, what would you give them?
I wish you would have asked me this before the show so I can think about it.
Whatever you come up with.
Something, oh my gosh, you're putting me on the spot. So wait, something for the audience to hear.
That maybe will change
I think
your life.
I think I gave them a lot already.
Yeah, no, you definitely gave us a lot,
I gave
yeah.
a lot of advice about success, about failures, about not being afraid to
Agreed.
to fail, but also not. I think, and again, and I did it too. I always tell people, especially, we'll roll it back into real estate and development because that's probably people who watch this want to know, how do you become, and it's it's the part that I brought up, and that is, don't fall in love with your deals. I always hear with people, oh, it's going to be great, it's going to be beautiful, and we're going to have this cool spa or gym or this or that, or we're going to have this rooftop, and people always get excited about a project. And I always say to them, fall in love with the numbers first. Dig in, find out everything. Is there a market? Don't sell yourself on anything. And if, as much as you love the project, if the numbers don't work, don't do it.
Wow.
I'll tell you, so many people that will bring me a deal or say something, and I'm going to tell them, don't do it. This deal's not going to work. But they'll still do it
Wow.
because I know you're wrong. I'm right. I'm telling you, I'm going to get it done because I have a vision.
Wow.
And I say, bullshit. You don't have a vision. your deal's not going to work. I'm telling you this right now. I mean, I'm a little bit softer than that, but yes, my advice to anybody is, if you're looking at something, at the end of the day, just take a step back, don't look at any of the reasons why you want to do it. Look at the only one reason you want to do it, and that's because it's going to make money.
Wow.
And that's it. That's the one reason.
Guys, Dan Kodsi in the house. Dan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
We gave
Thank
so
you.
many information to the audience. I'm sure they're going to love it. Dan, what is the best way for them to check out your maybe project and stuff like that? What is the website?
RPC Royal Palm Companies, right, is the company. You can just type in Google Royal Palm Companies. It'll take you to our website, or rpcholdings.com. Takes us to our corporate website.
And guys, if you enjoyed this episode and if you loved it, make sure you liked it, subscribe, put a comment, write down who should I interview next. Thank you guys again for watching. I really hope that you learned a lot from it. And I wish you guys all the best, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.